For joining us today. We're glad you could make it. We've got a fun best practice share today with Kelsey, and she's going to have Amanda Loper joining her to talk about that, I believe. So looking forward to that. And then we have a couple of votes, potentially a couple of votes and some items that I think there will be some good discussion amongst the commission. So, okay, these are our electronic meeting procedures. At the beginning of the meeting, all commission members participating electronically shall be identified by roll call so that the quorum can be established. Under Executive Order number 78, each time a commission member, staff, or other participant who is using audio-only participation wishes to speak, he or she shall identify themselves in a manner reasonably calculated to permit the public to ascertain the identity of the person speaking. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor issued Executive Order number 16, extended by Executive Orders numbers 34, 51, 60, 71, and 78, authorizing commissions to meet and conduct their essential business by electronic means if the commission determines that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Or considering items on the agenda, the commission needs to determine by roll call vote that the meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the commission and meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. All votes during the meeting shall be by roll call. So I'm going to start with the first one and say before we consider these items on the agenda, we'll do a roll call vote to say that everyone deems that this constitutes essential business for us to meet virtually. So Kathy for 6 Warren, Councilmember Colby Sledge.
Aye.
James Simmons.
Aye.
Laura Kuhlman.
Aye.
Jim Schmitz.
Aye.
Chris Farrell. Okay. Well, great. So Ashley, I assume next month we are going to be back in the conference room. Is that correct?
Yes, we are going to be back in the Sunny West Center. It looks like for some reason, some folks are trying to access the attendee, but they received a wrong link on an older version of the agenda, which is my fault. So I'm going to email that out really quickly. So if I seem distracted, that's why. But yes, we'll be back in person in the Sunny West room next month. Because the extension, there won't be another extension from the governor for that order.
All right. Great.
If there's under 15 people, it doesn't have to be approved by the Metro Health Department. If it's over 15 people, then it needs to be approved. I don't think that even with guests attending, should there be any, that will be over that 15 mark. And if there's 1 or 2, they said that that's okay, but I'm not going to apply to the health department at this time unless you think we'll be over that 15-person mark, but I don't assume that we will.
And what is the date of that meeting?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What's the date for that meeting?
The
26th.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think maybe just about a week in advance, it may be worth just checking in with folks to see who's going to be attending or not, just to make sure we don't go over that number.
Yes.
Okay. While you are sending that out, Ashley, I'm going to check in on the review and approval of the minutes. If everybody has had a chance to review those, we could have a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, I'm going to go down the list. Kathy for 6 Warren, Councilmember Colby Sledge.
Aye.
James Simmons.
Aye.
Laura Kuhlman.
Aye.
Jim Schmitz.
Aye.
Chris Farrell. Okay, great. So the project progress and financial update, Ashley, if you want to give us a little bit of an update on those, if you are ready.
Great. Yep. Give me just 1 second. So we received only 2 draw requests in the last month. Not as busy of a month, but I expect once temperatures rise a little bit, we'll see some more construction, so we'll be getting some more draw requests. But one in round 6 from Renewal House, they made their first draw on their round 6 property, and so that will increase their long-term care for pregnant and parenting mothers with substance abuse disorders and their children. So exciting work and much needed capacity building there. And then round 7, Living Development Concepts made their 4th draw on the Booker Street property, so that unit will be wrapping up soon and available. So 2 exciting ones. And then for the spring 2021 contracts, I got all of those to Macy last week, and we'll be on the 5/18 meeting for council. So that's the second council meeting in May. And then all of our grantees will be also attending the Affordable Housing Committee, as well as the Budget and Finance Committees before the actual council meeting on the 18th.
And Ashley, when is that the budget meeting? In case anybody
That would be on the
would like to-
17th.
What time is that meeting? I know sometimes folks like to attend that. Some commissioners may want to go if they are free. And you can send it out to us later if you don't have it.
So usually I think at 4, but I think based on the agenda load, sometimes they adjust the schedule.
Okay.
But we should know that about a week out. And
one thing I didn't mention was that the public comment will be in the chat box. So if there's not anything in there, we will always circle back at the end if somebody does have something they'd like to share. So let you finish up, Ashley. I think you had some more things.
So that's all I had.
Okay. All right. So then do we have any comments in the chat box?
No.
Feel free to leave those in there later, everybody, and we will circle back to those. But I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey, Brent, and Amanda. Thank you all for joining us today for our best practice share. Look forward to hearing what you're going to present.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Could I be made a presenter so I can share some slides? And while we're doing that, I'm Kelsey Osman. I think I've met you all at some point before we went fully virtual. And then we also have Brent, Elrod, and Amanda Loper on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and get some visuals up. And then I will let Brent introduce himself and urban housing.
All right, thanks, Kelsey. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? This is working? Okay, good. Thanks, Kelsey. So I'm Brent Elrod, the Managing Director at Urban Housing Solutions. Urban Housing, as you all probably know, but maybe not everybody, we're the largest nonprofit provider of affordable housing and the largest nonprofit community developer in Nashville. And we really focus on creating supportive communities with obviously anchored by affordable housing across Nashville. We now have about 1,500 apartments in the city, and are really animated by this idea of a hardware-software partnership where we provide the hardware of housing and physical space in a community and bring in software providers, service providers or kind of cultural programming through community partners to really help build stronger communities. So that's kind of that's what we do and why we do it. The reason we're on this call today is that we'll talk more about this Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute that UHS got to participate in several years ago, but it really gets to that, at least for me, this notion of stronger communities and it's stronger by design. So we'll get to that in a second here, but so I think if I'm not mistaken, the presentation is going to run a little bit through the AHDLI, Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute, that Urban Housing Solutions participated in. But is next really the snapshot of 26 in Clarksville, or is it the actual AHDLI model and then 26 in Clarksville?
It is Amanda first.
Amanda first. Thank you.
Just a quick intro. Hey everybody, I'm Amanda Loper. I'm with David Baker Architects. We are a firm that really specializes in housing of all scales and sizes and for folks of all incomes. We have a particular expertise around affordable housing and mixed use supportive housing in downtown urban environments. And we have offices in San Francisco and Oakland, where I was for many years before moving to Birmingham 5 years ago and starting our Southeastern office. And I think Brent will talk a little bit about how we met, but we're just overall housing nerds. And a quick hello to Gina, who I know. And we're just glad to be here with you today.
So we wanted to share a little bit of sort of a case study of a project that has actually received 2 different Barnes grants and would really not be possible without that investment. So also a big thank you to the commission for the work that you're doing and kind of shepherding and stewarding this really important resource. And I'll let Brent go back because this was before my time at Urban Housing.
Yeah, so we're sort of step back in time 7 years to when Urban Housing Solutions, with the help of the Barnes Fund, the inaugural year of the Barnes Fund, we got about $1.5 million from the Barnes Fund, $800,000 in home grant dollars to purchase 2121 26th Avenue North, which is the corner of southwest corner, 26th Avenue North and Clarksville Pike in North Nashville. And it was the River Village apartment complex. When we purchased it, it basically looked exactly like what you're seeing here on the left. It was a condemned apartment complex. It had all kinds of asbestos containing material that the prior owner had just dumped on the property, which you could see from the aerial view. There was like a trash pile. There was also asbestos containing material trash. It was an absolute mess and, a real travesty for the community. It was the biggest eyesore in North Nashville, hands down. So we had this opportunity to take a very visible, large, almost 6-acre site on transit, 3 miles from downtown, and take this, huge blight in North Nashville, and hopefully with the support of the community and with a good plan, redevelop that into a real asset and real anchor for long-term affordable housing and stronger, community ties, basically, in a neighborhood that even then was already starting to change somewhat, and obviously so much more so in the last few years. So with the Barnes Fund grant, we bought the property, we tore down these horrible buildings and developed the first phase, 26 in Clarksville phase 1, just a 23-unit building facing Clarksville Pike. And at the time, we really didn't have a very good site plan. It sort of speaks for itself here a little bit, but the site plan was very poorly developed. We just had this intention of basically doing the most we could with the small kind of scale grant combination that we had in the small loan that we were able to leverage for this 23-unit building, trying to do the most that we could with the 23-unit building by pushing it all the way to the street, maximum visibility on Clarksville Pike, and mainly just removing the blight and the asbestos and the actual environmental cleanup that was needed on the property. So dealing with the worst, blight and beginning to transform the property. That was our goal for 26 in Clarksville phase 1. As we engaged with the community, we began to build out this broader concept of an intergenerational arts-inspired community that would be a way to really bring in people from obviously all ages, but slightly different income levels and more of a mixed income housing model that would be both a resource for longtime North Nashvillians, people of color in 37208 specifically, and also a housing opportunity for newcomers, people who are moving into Nashville to go to one of the local HBCUs or, just for other reasons, young professionals in the community who are looking for a transit-connected apartment, but having this linkage, cultural linkage through arts inspiration, through arts activity, and housing for working artists, ultimately, to really tie together, again, a very long-term kind of stable residential population with obviously a lot of waves of new people moving in. So that was the theme. We didn't really have much of a plan. And so luckily, former urban housing employee, Keon Sawney, whom some of you may know, learned about this Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute that Enterprise puts on and this was in 2016. And so we already had developed the first phase. The first phase was at least under construction by the time we learned about AHDLI. And Keon applied for 26 in Clarksville as an opportunity, hopefully, to get this project kind of on the table for discussion among the experts that AHDLI convenes. AHDLI is really it's a forum that brings together basically exceptional architects and community developers and housing developers around key projects. It's a competitively kind of selected process for, at least for the projects. And I think it's also pretty competitively selected for the experts they bring in. And so it's just trying to match up that talent for free, really. It's free for the participants, matching up that design talent with the real community potential for a very intensive 2-day workshop, essentially. And so we were able to get 26 in Clarksville selected for the 2016 AHDLI in Atlanta, and took this project to Atlanta, which is where eventually we met David Baker and Daniel Simons, who's a partner of Amanda's out of San Francisco. And well, I think one of these slides shows where this went. We connected with Amanda after that initial contact, and Amanda began to work more consistently with us, actually, remotely at that time in Nashville, as we began to kind of build on the initial ideas that came from AHDLI and really envisioning a more active, vital hub for North Nashville. This is really kind of one of the earliest sketches on the tracing paper, I think, that Amanda had done.
And Brent, to also kind of butt in about that Affordable Housing Leadership Institute experience. I know one of the reasons we're here today is just to kind of share available resources. And one of the great things about that experience is it takes the project team, and as a professional, you're not hired to work on that particular project. There's a freedom in kind of stepping away from the pressures and constraints of schedules and expectations or whatever it might be, to really freely think about a particular project. So it's kind of this balanced freedom, but also thinking about, executable solutions. And that's one of the magical things I think about that program that Enterprise does, because that kind of environment really fosters ideas that might not have happened or come about in that day-to-day Monday through Friday grind.
Or even in that like contractual client, a consultant relationship where maybe there's a little bit like filtered, feedback because the consultant wants to make sure that the client, stays happy and all that kind of stuff. So
that's a great point too, Brent. Yeah, and one of the things about this particular sketch is before we started on this, before I got to go sit down with Brent and other folks in his actual office and talk about this, was, we saw things as designers that from kind of that 10,000 square foot level, it seemed to make sense, like future connections to adjacent neighborhoods, for example, which feels like a good idea. But then, when you get into it, when we met y'all and talked and kind of walked the site, we realized there were reasons that didn't work. But there were a lot of really good ideas that did start to work. And I would say some of the main, Brent, I'd go easier on that earlier site plan you had. I would just say it was a civil engineer generated site plan, that was hitting a specific set of parameters, parking and stormwater and turning radii. But I think we would all agree those aren't the things that make memorable people-oriented places.
Yes.
And so, since that overlay was checked, we came in and worked within that that framework and started to ask, well, how can we make this more of a place and one that feels, not necessarily engineered, but designed and really about people?
Well said. And yeah, so I think these next slides sort of show how that sketch became, obviously more, became sharper, basically. Like the sort of loose sketch became sharper and more and better defined, more precise, basically. And part of that was really through, consultation with the neighborhood. We ultimately rezoned this property. It was only entitled for, I think, 78 apartments or something based on the existing zoning. We ended up going through an SP rezoning effort with the neighborhood to allow up to 168 apartments or residential units and some commercial space. And in that neighborhood engagement effort to get the SP passed, that's when we learned that even though maybe from a metro planning and sort of like a 10,000 foot, view, street connections to the neighboring, community or to the neighborhood around this property makes sense on paper or, in the abstract. The neighbors really did not want that at all. And it was kind of a condition of their approval that we would agree not ever to make a connection in the neighborhood. So it was a little bit different take there. And so the plan ultimately reflected that shift but still maintained a lot of the essence of what came out of that initial AHDLI workshop, and then Amanda's kind of early sketches on the site. So phase one, as I mentioned, or as Kelsey mentioned also, was a Barnes Fund inaugural year, the Barnes Fund Award, and then 2017 we applied for another grant, Barnes Fund grant, to fund and build phase two, which is the 4-story building on the right-hand side of the picture that ended up adding 63 more apartments, including 10 artists. 10 units are set aside for working artists, and some commercial space actually that we funded with our own money that faces 26th Avenue North and Clarksville Pike, and begun to kind of build out and lease that commercial space in the last 6 months, which is exciting. So, and then phase three was developed and finished last year, which added the 55 units of low-income senior housing on the left side of the picture with the solar panel, and then a community building in the center of the site to really kind of tie it all together, create a true kind of central space that once COVID is fully, or at least sufficiently behind us, then we can begin to activate more, to build with community programming and educational events to begin to really, bring people out of their apartments and bring them together in that kind of common space. So, so there's the before and after, I guess, kind of the early engineer plan versus the sense of place, the placemaking plan that David Baker helped to really refine and came up conceived of and then refined. So we're so happy with the outcome. We haven't actually finished the redevelopment of 26 in Clarksville. We have up to 27 apartments or townhome type units that we could still develop, and we will eventually finish it out some way or another. But just with the, it's substantially built out now with the first 3 phases being complete. We're really seeing now the qualitative, improvement over, I think, what would have been the case if we just sort of followed that initial trajectory of what's the most efficient kind of, location siting of buildings on the site. If we were just looking for efficiency, I think we would have probably had a very different center of the site, for example, and wouldn't have had this beautiful community building that I'm excited to begin to bring people into this year. So, I think, Amanda, you have certainly, your perspective from the HDLI also, which I wanted to make sure that, you could speak to. And you may have participated in more than one. We've only done the one. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like building on that kind of atmosphere it creates, because you've kind of gone somewhere else. Enterprise does a great job of working with both the professionals and the developers that come there ahead of time to kind of prepare for that moment. So Brent, I know you had some homework to do. I prepared a presentation about, just a really quick high level, like 9 design ideas that you could integrate into housing. So there are kind of inspiring talks in addition to these charrettes. And then of course, you share meals and maybe some drinks, and you continue the conversations that happen from that day. And I think it really is an enjoyable, but also rich and pretty impactful experience. And I think one of the ways, I've been kind of in awe of Brent and Kelsey with their, I use this term sustained tenacity. I feel like it takes a tenacity every day, a willingness to see if you can fit the, sidewalk extension, or if you can fund that commercial on the ground floor. I really want to applaud Brent and Kelsey, because I think every day they've kind of dedicated themselves to making all those little things happen, which together creates a more people-oriented place. and their willingness to be flexible on a plan they had already started. But I think the way we altered the 26 and Clarksville plan shows that, you know, we rocked the boat a little bit, but not in a like structural way. Or maybe we changed some structures, but like the deal didn't fall apart or the timeline didn't go away. Yeah, we didn't capsize. But you know, ideas about like the left was below or before. So, you know, there were kind of these two smaller buildings, and, you know, if y'all know this intersection, it's a pretty car dominated zone, and this idea that you could really meet that corner with a building of scale and something that has like an iconic moment about it that really says, you know, at that corner, this is a new place, and putting a building that has kind of a weight that can stand all those fast moving cars. And then also, you know, there's a bus stop there. And then you can see, even in the landscaping here, this idea about from the senior building to the left. I don't know if you can see my mouse, probably not. But from the senior building, we kept like traffic calming, you know, striping and a raised speed table so that it's a little bit safer to get out to that central green, and made the similar moves as the building over there on the right. And, you know, I feel like that's an example of pretty simple things to keep in your plan, but again, say through design, say this is really about people and don't drive through, you know, through here really quickly. And then, you know, what was previously a stormwater area, which is super important and something we should address. We found other places for that, and really using that central space to create a physical kind of neighborhood community hub for all the new density that's now on this site, and this idea of a community building that you can see there at the top. The other thing that you can't quite see here is there's another idea about having a different scales of housing. So along the bottom, what's planned for the future are townhouses that would relate more to the adjacent neighborhoods, but also would provide a diversity of housing type, which is really important when you're able to, you know, plan at this kind of level, so everything doesn't feel so same. And then I guess one more thing to mention is that, again, Kelsey and Brent were kind of so in process that we came alongside and offered kind of conceptual schematic guidance for the architecture. And then they partnered with local firms, you know, that are up in Nashville to execute both of these. And I think they've turned out beautifully. And like I said, it really is this intentionality that you have to take on because, you know, sometimes it is a little bit harder. It takes a little bit more intention to achieve some of these things.
I just wanted to highlight to Amanda's point about available resources. Along the way, Enterprise has been a really critical resource. Obviously, AHDLI was really important in sort of setting the tone and the trajectory for the development. And that sort of sparked a longer path and relationship with Enterprise. So following AHDLI, Urban Housing Solutions applied to be a host for the Enterprise Rose Fellowship, which is how I ended up in Nashville for a 3-year placement jointly with UHS and with the Civic Design Center. And that's really a tool and a program for kind of embedding design capacity within nonprofits and community development organizations. And so then I had the opportunity to continue to work on this property and to, as Amanda said, have that kind of intentionality with all the resources that Enterprise has to offer. From we use their design guidelines for the senior building to sort of poke and prod the details and figure out, you know, how do we really make this building work as well as it possibly can, given all the constraints for a particularly vulnerable population. That phase 3 building is also our first Enterprise Green Communities building. It's still in the post-build review, but that's a green sort of rating and evaluation system specifically for affordable housing development. So it really takes into account sort of the cost benefit of these additional upgrades in some ways, or just different strategies that that can have a greater impact without necessarily adding cost. So it takes into account resident well-being, active design, so having windows in your stairwells to encourage residents to use them. That building also has solar panels, which is our first solar project, which is really exciting. And then Opportunity 360 is sort of a research and database portal. And so we've, again, used that to source data to provide kind of background and justification for other grants, and really just helping us from a data and analytical standpoint better understand at the census tract level what's happening in different parts of the city. So that's it for slides. Happy to open it up for any questions or discussion.
There are no questions currently, and if any of the commissioners have any questions, I welcome to use the little raise your hand function to ask a question. But I'll go ahead and get it started with executive power and privilege. But so to give people kind of an idea of runway time, what was kind of the initial conception of this project to actual implementation, just to give a kind of logistic overview for those who might be listening and thinking, well, that might be something that I want to apply for a future project, or look at some of these resources. What is the kind of timeline requirements for doing something like you all did with 26 in Clarksville, be it at that same scale level or even on a smaller level?
It's a good question. So we were already underway with the project, with the first phase of the project, when we applied for AHDLI, and that was in 2016. And then we, as Amanda mentioned, I actually I meant to mention myself that relationship that we'd built, or that we kind of fostered with David Baker through AHDLI, led to the schematic planning for 26 in Clarksville Phase 2 and Phase 3. This kind of schematic plans, David Baker helped refine those, and really were the basis for the Barnes Fund grant that we applied for in 2017. So basically about a year from the AHDLI to the actual submission of the Barnes grant for Phase 2. By that time, we already had a really, the plan had evolved substantially and became pretty much what it is now. There were some further refinements later, but by the time we applied for the Phase 2 project in 2017, our site plan had really gone through several important kind of iterations, and we had a very clear picture of that second phase, and really the third phase pretty well by then as well. So so I get about a year from like that HDLI experience to actually being ready to apply for a project, to fund a project from the design process. Even though we were already under construction, in many ways it was like a brand new site planning exercise, like a brand new site. Amanda, and this is just a credit to David Baker, really helped us think about that sense of place, creating a place, and making sure that we give enough time and thought to that, and so we could have done something more quickly, I guess, but I don't think it would have turned out as well. So I really appreciate, their emphasis on people-oriented places. So
I think too, it's really interesting that even though y'all had already started, there were still so many of the bones that I would say hadn't been set. So I guess the point I wanted to make is that it's the site planning and like setting the bones, I'll call it, the massing, the configuration of buildings. That stuff is so important. And, I see a lot in our projects that, developers feel like they often don't have a lot of resources in the beginning of the project, even though something like this kind of planning is really important. So, I mean, I don't know if that's how you as a commission want to think about that, but I think this like pre-development setting of those site plan bones, has such a ripple effect through the final product. And it's really important, but one that I think I see a lot of developers struggle with, and finding the time and the resources to think critically about that stage.
Does anybody else have questions for Kelsey, Amanda, or Brent? Thank you all. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, I was going to say I can ask another question just because I feel like you weren't grilled enough. But I feel like, so you've talked a little bit about funding, and I know that that's something that we all care about, both as a commission and as our attendees listening. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how improved design maybe improved your capital stack, or how you were able to leverage that both for dollars and the overall site design.
That's a really good question. I do think the concept we got from David Baker for phase 26 in Clarksville, phase 2, and which also became another separate concept for phase 3. Obviously, we successfully financed both of those, and the design matters, and we believe that design matters. We know that others, are compelled by good design. I think funders respond well to quality, quality architecture, quality design, and a project that appears like it will, add real value to a community for, decades. So I think I don't know if I can quantify dollar for dollar what an answer to your question, but I do think having David Baker's conceptual, kind of design assistance on both of those phases really positioned both of those applications very well for eventual funding. The phase 3 project was a low-income housing tax credit award, a 9% tax credit award, which is very competitive. And we were able to secure the allocation in part because of the design, but the design was also really informed by a lot of conversation, partnership, collaboration around a concept of basically technology enhanced and healthcare enriched senior housing. So really there was a whole concept there, but it was also really, I think, expressed very, immediately through the conceptual design. And I think it's hard to put a real figure on it, but we believe in, the intangible value anyway, and the kind of qualitative value certainly.
And I think too,
Yeah.
it's partly about, attracting capital, but I think it's also about using capital really strategically. And I think that's one of the things that Amanda's team does so well, is finding the really high impact places to put, your really nice material. We only have, a little bit of it, so let's make it go a long way. And so I think it has also been about, the really strategic and intentional use of those resources because they are so limited.
And one thing too that we talk about in a lot of the application rounds is what the design, sort of a well-designed project and property really does, is it helps a lot. We've talked a lot about NIMBYism and where affordable housing should and could go. And, it's always a longer conversation when we're discussing the applications. And I think it goes a long way when you have a design like yours in working with neighborhoods and working with the city to help fund things and working for things like the rezone that you all had to do. There are many more of those that are going on. And so I definitely appreciate it from that side as well. All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, thank you all for coming today. That was great. Really appreciate you spending the time to put that together. And I'm sure we will see you all very soon.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. All right, everybody else, we've got a couple of new policies to review. We started looking at one last month. Ashley sent those back out to everybody. I hope you all have had time to go through those. But I think these have stemmed from a lot of discussions we have had here at the commission level, and how to, as what Ashley has been doing is really getting us in a really good position to deal with contracts and how we function on a month-to-month basis. And I think these will really address some of the things we've discussed lately. So Ashley, I don't know if you want to do just a short review of both of these, and then we can, have some discussion from the commission members.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do that. And like I said, both of these policies that we're going to kind of talk about right now are specific policies, yes, but it'll go in a larger grant policy document that we already have built out. It needs a little bit of refining, but since these pieces are net new, that's why they're separate and you're looking at them separately, but they won't be posted on our website separate from an overall grant policy that just applies to the Barnes program. So we're thinking about them piecemeal, but we're also looking at it holistically. When so the first one that we're going over is the grant extension policy. And I know we had some discussion last time about why extensions are usually requested in the first place and why a first extension, or how many first extensions we've given out versus how many second extensions. So I did also send that data to you that Chris Farrell suggested that I look into. And so if we're looking at that, in total, we've given out a total of 17 different extensions. Only 4 of those were second extensions. Primarily, the rest of them were first extensions. And those were all from rounds 4 and 5 because we haven't hit the expiration date for rounds 6 and 7 yet. However, we are creeping up on that round 6 expiration date of August 7th of this year. So I do expect us to have about 3 or 4 different extension requests in our next commission meeting. So that's something to be aware of as I've been talking to the grantees coming up on that expiration date. Largely, as you can see throughout all of these different primary reasons that I've listed, and these again were only the reasons that I have available to me because I don't have all of the emails and we didn't have a process before where we actually logged where the actual extension requests were. But we do have that now because we have a form. And so moving forward, we'll always have those logged together with the actual extension request. But you can see the time of extension. Primarily, we've granted anywhere from a 2-month extension all the way to 12 months, but nothing longer than 12 months. We mostly grant 12 months, generally in the 8 to 12 month is what we usually see. And as we're going forward, more often than not, folks are requesting that 12-month extension just to give them some more room. A lot of times it's either title issues or construction. And I think that's something that we want to just talk about today because we did list that we would not, in the second part of that extension policy, if there was not financing to move forward, that we would not actually grant a second extension. And then one of the considerations I wanted to talk to you all about is that as the construction costs continue to rise to nearly an astronomical level, if that's something we want to revisit, although the Barnes Fund cannot go back and grant more monies to a project if construction costs rise, the one thing we could do is grant an extension. So I don't know if that's going to impact this overall policy or if that's something we move to a third extension instead or not. But I know that there was a concern in previous extension requests that there was not financing to move forward. So that was a concern of why we might think about declining an extension request. So that was included in the second extension. But if we think that construction costs will continue to impact enough for a second extension, that's something we might want to revisit. So that's an overall overview of what we talked about previously and the policy itself. Essentially, the policy says that we will grant an extension if it's requested 3 months before the expiration date. First extensions generally pretty easily to get. Not that we expect everyone to ask for an extension, but that it is more often than not needed in order to complete construction because it does take a lot of time. But that second extensions would have to have more extenuating circumstances in order to get an extension, such as titling or zoning issues that are kind of outside of the realm of control of the actual nonprofit, not necessarily due to construction times or to costs of the actual project itself. So I'm happy to open the floor for discussion, whether it be about the data that I sent you or about the policy itself.
I got a question on on these construction jobs, do they usually have a construction contract in place that would help them lock in some of these costs? Or are they fixed price contracts? Or are they doing cost plus? Or kind of how are they doing that to help manage that? And Gina, you may have.
And I would say, yeah, I would say getting someone to lock in a price right now is very difficult because
Well, right
the
now,
market is so volatile. Yeah, right now, anyway, I know you may be talking about in the past. And actually you can answer what everybody's contracts are, but I think that's probably the problem going forward anyway, is the ability to do that.
I mean,
But actually, I don't know if you know what kind of contracts most.
right. Gina, as you understand, it's a matter of, who's taking the risk on the cost? Is it up to this point, maybe it's been the contractors, but now with new contracts and with what's going on, I'm sure that they have modified the way they're doing business.
But I do not know what the contract status is. And Ashley, that may be something you want to, report back to everybody if you don't have that handy.
Well, and it's something we may want to actually have, know as we go into, maybe a good question to ask as we do a next round or whatever. So we have that in consideration for the chance that there might be some need for an extension or whatever going forward, or even in how viable the project is based upon what its original budget may have been.
Exactly. And that was something I had mentioned to Ashley earlier was, what happens. I suspect we will see some extensions because of that. But then the real question is what happens? Where do the extra dollars come from at that point? So. Right.
And well, then the other question is does an extension, is it something where somebody said, well, we want to extend because we want to wait till prices come back down? Right. They think that they're just spiked because of certain things. Be aware and think about.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how people have requested in the past. I know in the past, folks have, our contract is a standard Metro contract. We do have procurement policies in there, but and Macy, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing in our contract that says you have to have a construction contract that has a fixed rate or anything of that. So it's really up to the nonprofit to negotiate that for themselves. So I'm not entirely sure how most folks have gone about that. Feel free to use the public comment option.
That would be helpful. Right. All the grantees on the phone. I think that would be helpful to know how many of you structure your contracts. I suspect it will be multiple different ways.
Yes, and you would hope that by the time they get to the requesting funding, have already been to that point where they've got their costs locked in before they even get into the application process.
One other thing, just seeing the data that you sent, which was very helpful, Ashley, was I was surprised at the percentage of extensions. There were more extensions than not, is the way it read. And it made me want to rethink either are we sending projects through that aren't necessarily ready, or does the time period of the extension need to be longer? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I was just curious if anybody else had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was my question, Gina. How do we handle if on first request they say, hey, I need 5 months extension, then they come back and say, okay, I need another 5 months. Is that two? Is that a second one, or are we trying to grant within a 12-month period? I know I saw the language within the draft, but does first extension extend up to if I estimate wrong on my timing?
Yeah, I think that by the nature of the extension themselves and actually having a policy in place that folks would be more encouraged to request longer extensions. I think that it would make sense to request a longer extension and then say, hey, we finished our project early, just like we finished our Metro contract early. That definitely is easier for us to navigate than to have a bunch of different contracts at different endpoints, because that honestly was a confusing aspect for me as a program manager. I was going back through all of the different legislation and being like, okay, they requested 2 months to the second one. And then, and I'm having to sit there and do month math. And so I would say that for all of our first extensions, we grant at a year. I don't think, Macy, we don't have the ability to grant anything longer than 12 months, do we?
I mean, you all have the ability to. We can't do longer than 24 months. That's what the like original term is in the grant contract. We could do 12, 14, 16 months. I don't think there's a precedent for that, but there's nothing that prohibits it.
Yeah, I think that it would make sense for me to say that they have another year to complete their contracts, because many folks do actually end up completing their contracts within that extra year. Because we don't have the ability to change the 24-month mark at the onset of their project, I think it does make sense to give them a longer extension runway, but that we say, okay, but in order to get a second extension, it's a more arduous process if you're going to need longer than the 12 months. But that we just encourage folks to request a longer extension on the front end versus asking for 2 or 4 months or 6 months, because they think that asking for an extension at all is kind of like a demerit against them, when it's not in actuality, considering how many folks actually ask for extensions, at least for the first time. Does that make sense?
It does. I just want to make sure that the draft reflects that, because it says that any grant extension request longer than 6 months will require additional interim report. So if I'm requesting an extension and ask for, let's say 5 months, are we saying that we're actually going to you should fill out more information, so I'll give you 12 months? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, I think that we would ask them to actually have an extension for 12 months, and then at that interim period, they have to report back to us anyway, and we can have that checkup with them at 3, 4, 5 months and say, okay, where are you at in your construction? Oh, great, you're going to wrap up early. Wonderful. Here's the final reporting process. But it also gives us the ability, that interim report, it doesn't necessarily have to be a really formal report. It can be something that is like, we have a conversation with them, and by we, I mean me, and then I report back to you all, but and ask them what barriers they're encountering even during their extension period. So that way we have an opportunity to help them if we can, if they're encountering barriers that we can address.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
I understand that.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Colby, Laura? Because I think
I'm back, but I have to admit, this is Laura. My audio went out for a little bit, so I'm going to refrain for the moment while I kind of catch up. Apologies.
I'm good with the conversation. I think that's the right direction.
Agreed.
Okay, well, I would say let me just refine the wording a little bit to make, to Jim's point, to make it a little bit more clear that we would, kind of what the preference would be in the both the interim reporting process and the actual extension length on the front end. And then I will send out a revised draft to you all for your next commission meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to vote on it at that point. And then that way it also offers Kaki and Chris the opportunity to look at the data that I pulled, since Chris was the one that requested it. Does that sound good to everyone?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
great feedback.
Okay, then the other one was the contract breach policy, which I know we've had quite a bit of discussion on, and I think this is something we definitely need, as we all were trying to think through what was the best response to our previous contract breach. So, Ashley, if you want to run through this one too, I suspect everybody had a chance to read it, but it might be good to hit the high points for those watching.
Yeah, absolutely. So the breach policy essentially is, we actually had a breach policy in our contract. However, we did not have something that addresses kind of what the commission would do in terms of what the punishment for those infractions would look like for the nonprofits. And so when we actually had our first breach, it was kind of a confusing situation, I think, for everyone involved. And so that led to a lot of like, well, we should have done this, or maybe we shouldn't have. And so having a more defined policy would just help us set the guide rails a little bit. So that way it still gives you some flexibility in that first infraction, but it also offers us the opportunity to make sure that it's an equitable process that all nonprofits are going through if there's a breach in the future. So hopefully there's not, but it also serves as a deterrent to make sure that folks understand exactly what the breach process is and how that will operate in the future. The first infraction essentially says that the Metro Housing Trust Fund Commission will review the breach and determine subsequent consequences, similar to what you all did last time, whether that's, and this has some flexibility, depending on who the grantee is, or, their history with us coming back. If this is like, it wouldn't make sense, right, for somebody that never applies for our funding again to say, well, you can't apply in the next round, because they wouldn't plan to do that. Or if that's, asking them to give back some of the funding, we're not, that allows some flexibility there. But the second infraction says that it will require them to return the funds, as well as the grant award will be rescinded for the contract in question, and that all prior contracts, should any open contracts be open, they will remain effective until their termination is determined by the contract date, but no extensions will be granted. And that falls in line with our extension policy as well, that says contract breaches will nullify their opportunity to receive a contract extension for a project. And then, of course, if their contract expires, they aren't eligible to make any more drawdowns on their projects. And then the third infraction says the organization will return the grant funds and be prohibited from applying in future Barnes grant funding cycles for up to 5 years, as determined by the Metro Housing Trust Fund Commission. And then in the kind of preface there, it says that all grant infractions are cumulative. So if a organization makes or has a contract breach on one contract, that it's cumulative. So if a different contract is what they breached, that would then be their second infraction, not them going back, and that's their first infraction for that particular contract. So all of the breaches are cumulative to the organization for up to 10 years. And this was kind of a combined effort between Hannah, Macy, myself, and Bob Cooper in Metro Legal to kind of see what we could do. So that way we have a policy in place that will also help our audit, when it comes time for them to review any infractions on our contracts, to say like, yes, a contract breach did happen, but then here are subsequent actions afterward to make sure that no future contract breaches occur, etc. Does anybody have anything to add, or I'll just keep nervous talking?
No, I think it's great, actually. The only and it's probably, I don't know if this is the right way to ask this, but the only loophole I see is what if a company changes their name?
Okay.
Yeah. So I just put it out there for the group to think about. That's that's probably for you, Macy.
Yeah, if they change their name, we would have to amend their contract to enter into a contract with the new legal entity. So the contract would still be the same. It would just be with a different group. And I think that this would still apply.
Okay.
I have just one question for you all. I mean, we all spoke about the one breach recently. Have there been any others that you know of in recent years? I'm just kind of curious how frequent this could potentially be an issue.
I am not aware of any. I think I've been with you all for 3 years, and I'm not aware of any.
Well, hopefully, if you ever became aware of any, you would tell us, because that's ethical. And in the future, definitely do that. But
And I think that's more my question is, I'm asking it just in a way that I'm making sure all the entities really understand everything that's in there. I suspect they do, but just, we put this policy in place, you all understand what your contract says and there's no confusion. And these are the consequences if one of those things are breached.
the only question that I would have for you all is, do you think that the first infraction should have a set, measured, expected action to be taken against the organization, or do you prefer the flexibility of the commission to be able to decide in the event of a first infraction?
I like the flexibility because not all breaches are created the same. I mean, some breach could be more egregious than something else. And I think that we kind of know that from what we've been through.
Okay. All right. Well, if you all are okay with this policy, this is one that you can vote on, and everyone loves a vote.
I just want to make sure no one else has any more questions before we do that. Laura, Colby, James.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Okay, I'm going to go down the list. Khaki for 6 Warren. Councilmember Colby Sledge.
Aye.
James Simmons.
Aye.
Laura Coleman.
Aye.
Jim Schmidt.
Aye.
Chris Farrell. All right, I think the motion is passed, Ashley. You got one of these done. We can talk
Awesome.
about the other one next month.
I know. I definitely just did like the homeschool high five to myself. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. And so I was about to steal Gina's thunder by moving to the
No,
next
go ahead. Go ahead. I
section.
was like, because I'm turning this over to you and Macy. I know we've got some training that we're going to do. I don't know if there's anything else before we jump into our training. If the grantees don't want to stick around, you've got a SurveyMonkey update on here. And then I think the HR training update is for all of us. So I think most everybody has signed up. Is that correct, Ashley? Or
Yep,
has it just been-
yes, I have received officially notice that all of you have signed up for that HR training now from Metro. That's separate from this ethics training that Macy is about to give you. And then SurveyMonkey, the PO has been put into and approved finally. So the contract is signed with them. So hopefully we'll be able to move forward on that this month. And then lastly, the only thing I wanted to briefly update you on is remember way back when I said I was going to send out grantee information to confirm both MDHA, THDA funding, as well as their AMI final unit counts, notes on the project, and final addresses. I have received all of those back from all of the grantees except for 1 or 2. So that's great news. We have a bunch of data to sift through to finalize and make sure that all of our unit counts as well as our AMIs are correct. So that way, Gina, we're working toward that better map of exactly where all of our different AMIs are located, as well as where our overlap of THDA, MDHA, and Barnes funding is. And then I also am in the process of getting all of the restricted covenants from those projects as well. And we're also working on an updated restricted covenant document with affordable housing resources and banker's title. So hopefully we'll have a better template for a restricted covenant document moving forward that's easier to fill out at the end of the project, because I think there was some confusion for some of the grantees, since that burden was really placed on them to file with the clerk. Some folks did not complete the restricted covenant, so we'll be able to send out an easy template for them to be able to complete that and ensure that we have all those restrictions placed on the properties. That's it.
In the spirit of being ethical and also communicating, I have another meeting that I have to go to, so I can't continue. So Macy, do I need?
Well, I'll just send you the PowerPoint and I'm sure that you'll look at it and study it and let me know if you have any questions.
I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy if that, I will do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, do you want me to take over? Can I get the ball or the presenter thing? So I can share some slides. Looks like Kelsey has it. Nice. Okay. So, hold on one second. Okay, can you all hear me? Okay. This ethics presentation is something that the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Commission recommended that the legal department give to every board and commission of the Metro government. So if any of you are on another board or commission, I'm sorry, you've got to sit through this twice. But it's pretty straightforward, and I feel like we go over this every couple of years, but if you're fairly new, some of this might be new information. But the goals of this training are to understand that you cannot accept benefits related to your role on this Metro board, to understand when you may be biased or have a conflict that you should recuse yourself, to remember to disclose knowledge that you have received an agenda item, or you have reviewed, that should say, an agenda item from outside the meeting. Remember to articulate the specific reasons and bases for your decision. And then also to understand that the Open Meetings Act prohibits deliberation outside board meetings, and the Public Records Act makes almost all of your emails, even those that do not come from a Metro email server, are open to the public. And then understand best practices for making informed decisions. So the first goal related to understanding that you can't accept benefits relating to your role on the board talks about soliciting benefits, or when people offer you benefits that are related to your role as a member of this particular commission. So the Metro Code, Chapter 2.222 is this ethics ordinance in the Metro Code that applies to all Metro employees, but it also applies to all members of boards and commissions. And it lists several things that employees and board members are prohibited from doing, but among those are some of these that I've listed in this PowerPoint. You cannot accept or solicit a benefit that might reasonably tend to influence you to act improperly. You also cannot use Metro property, services, or funds for personal purposes. And you may not use non-Metro information, non-public Metro information for personal gain or for the gain of any family member or other employer. So in going through this, I was trying to think of how this could apply to members of this commission. And, you know, like you couldn't talk to a family member who works for a nonprofit that maybe would participate in one of our Barnes Fund rounds. You would not be able to talk to them about what you all are looking for this year, and you would actually need to probably recuse yourself from voting on a matter if something like that came up. There are a few other things listed on this page. You shall not use a Metro position improperly to secure unwarranted privileges or exemptions for yourselves, your relatives, or others. You also should not accept other employment which might impair your independent judgment and the performance of your duties on this board. And if you did, we would probably just ask that you step down from this board. Also, you shall not accept any benefit, which this says employee, but it also applies to board members, should reasonably believe was intended to influence any action taken in your official capacity. So let's say someone from, I don't want to pick on anyone, someone from a nonprofit said, hey, Gina, you know, I'll take you to dinner at Kane Prime if you can make sure that we get this grant. Obviously, Gina, you should not go to dinner at Kane Prime.
I don't even eat meat, Macy, so that wouldn't work very well.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about you. But you guys get the point here. There are a few exceptions. So awards of trifling value that are publicly presented in recognition of your service. So think like trophies, plaques, etc. Gifts unrelated to your position as a Metro employee or board member. Meals are okay as long as they have a value less than $25 in the calendar year, which nowadays that's like one meal. Free or discounted admissions tickets from any single source within a calendar year up to $100. So there is a board of ethical conduct that is established to hear complaints and render advisory opinions about these standards. So if someone has a grievance or wants to file an ethics complaint against you, this is where they would do it, to the Metro Board of Ethical Conduct. So any elected official or member of a board or commission can request an advisory opinion from this board related to compliance. So if you want to know if you can accept something and you don't like the advice that I give you, you can always petition the Board of Ethical Conduct for an opinion. The ethics complaint procedures are listed below. Complaints regarding elected officials are brought to the Board of Ethical Conduct. The Department of Law, my office, investigates, evaluates, and makes a report to the board regarding whether the facts, if proven true, would amount to an ethics violation. Then this board decides whether or not to hold a hearing, and then if a hearing is held, parties are given an opportunity to present their side, both parties. If there are any violations of the ethics code that we went over earlier, this board can recommend to the council that the person be censured. They can recommend that the person have to resign his or her position. This could be their employment with Metro or their position on a board. They can also recommend that the matter be referred to the district attorney, or they can refer the matter to the legal director, requesting that civil action be initiated for restitution or other relief. So the second goal is to understand when you might be biased or have a conflict and you should recuse yourself. So as board members, you all have a duty of independence. This means you cannot act based on your own self-interest, based on a bias against or in favor of people you know personally. So if you've got a friend who is going to be coming before the board to get, a $2 million grant, you should not vote for them if they are your friend, or you should disclose that if they are your friend, if they're a personal friend. If it's just someone that you know professionally, that's fine. You also, if it's someone that you don't particularly like, you should not have your vote be based on a bias. You also have a duty of independence, and you cannot vote based on the interest of the director or contractors with whom your board interacts. So all this to say is you have to be impartial. You have to act based on the law and the evidence presented to you. So here's a hypothetical. I have a potential conflict. Should I recuse myself? Yes, you should if you are biased based on personal interest. And then we've got an example included here. If you will gain or lose money fairly, directly from a decision, then you should recuse yourself. If you are biased or prejudiced for or against a party, either as an individual or as a member of a group, for example, if you are close friends or business partners with someone and you cannot be objective, or you should recuse yourself if you cannot fairly or impartially weigh the evidence because you have prejudged fact issues. This is continued from the last one. No, you should not recuse yourself if you will not gain or lose money fairly directly from the decision, and you should not recuse yourself if you can be objective and you don't believe your participation will create an appearance of impropriety. In that case, disclose potential conflict, but state that you believe you can be unbiased and will participate. If you're uncertain, it says please consult with staff and or Metro Legal because your participation in a decision may be challenged on appeal. So if we get sued, I can't think of an instance when this board or commission has been involved in a lawsuit, but they've certainly been threatened. But just know that, you know, if you feel like you should maybe recuse yourself, just talk to us, Ashley and I. Goal 3, remember to disclose knowledge that you've received about an agenda item from outside the meeting. So if you've gone and done a site visit and have, you know, some information that the rest of the board might not have, it's always good to just share that with the board and make that information, whatever you're basing your decision on, public. So this knowledge can also include attempts to lobby you outside the meeting. So if a member of a nonprofit calls you outside of the meeting and tries to lobby you on something, that's something that you should definitely share with the commission. Knowledge can also include your expertise or experience with this type of issue or an area of town when making a decision. And I think this is always helpful for people. You know, we've got members on this board that have all kinds of different backgrounds and areas of expertise, and I think it's always good to, you know, get that type of feedback like we did earlier with you, Gina. I think you know, the information that you all can share is always very valuable. So the 4th goal is to remember to articulate the specific reasons and basis for your decision. Acceptable reasons include criteria in the relevant guidelines or laws, the facts presented at the meeting, which is a lot of times what you all are voting on, past experience with similar issues, and then studies by experts for specific observations made by the public. Unacceptable reasons include things like sympathy for the applicant or for people who are opposed to the approval. So if someone, you know, comes before the board and they've got a sad SAP story, you shouldn't vote for them just because you feel sorry for them. You know, obviously, and this doesn't apply to this board as much, but you vote, you know, for other reasons, not for sympathy. And then another unacceptable reason includes opposition that is not based on the relevant guidelines or laws. And then I've included language from a BZA case where they voted against something because it may be noisy and they already had too much traffic in that particular area. The 5th goal is understanding that the Open Meetings Act prohibits deliberation outside board meetings, and the Public Records Act makes almost all of your emails open to the public. Board members should absolutely avoid the use of email to discuss board issues or to invite comments from other members concerning any public business. Like I said at the beginning, it does not matter whether your email that you're sending it from is a Metro email address or a private email address. Violations of the Open Meetings Act make decisions based on these deliberations void. And a judge can also order court supervision of this board if it feels like we are violating the Open Meetings Act. I think that Hannah and Ashley have done a great job of making sure that when emails are sent out that people don't reply all, or that everyone's email addresses are copied, blind copied. And I think this group does a really good job of avoiding violations of the Open Meetings Act. Not all boards are good about doing stuff like that. So this talks about what is a meeting as defined by the Open Meetings Act. So a meeting is when 2 or more members of a governing body, or for example, this commission, meet to make a decision for a recommendation to a public body. So if you all are deliberating about a decision and there are 2 board members present, that is technically a meeting. So a meeting requires that adequate public notice be given. Notice informs affected parties of their opportunity to be heard and gives them time to prepare for and anticipate the meeting. So Tennessee courts have determined that adequate public notice is sufficient notice under the circumstances that would fairly inform the public of the meeting, which is extremely vague. Our rule of thumb is we like to have agendas posted 7 days in advance. I think I've got that listed here. The following are not considered meetings as long as there is no decision made or deliberation. So on-site inspection, if you all are meeting as a group to go see a new habitat build, that would not trigger the meeting because you all are just going to look at, the habitat build, not deliberating over anything, not talking about any agenda items. Something like that would be okay. A chance meeting or informal assemblage if Gina and James run into each other at the coffee shop, that's okay. And then also attorney-client meetings, so executive sessions with someone from my office and that would be a meeting regarding potential litigation or ongoing litigation. Those meetings are exempt from the Open Meetings Act. So I'm actually going to skip through this electronic meetings, these slides, because as of tomorrow, we will no longer be doing electronic meetings. So if you don't mind, I'm going to skip through this slide and the next slide. The 6th goal is understanding best practices to make informed decisions. So for staff, best practices are to provide a detailed agenda for each meeting, ideally at least a week ahead of the meeting, so that the public may be informed of issues to be deliberated or decided. The board may review relevant documents or contracts in preparation for the meeting. Also provide a staff report or recommendation for each agenda item in written or oral form with the reasoning behind this recommendation. And then also start each meeting with a declaration by any board members, conflicts or recusals on agenda items. And I will say that the agendas in the last 2 years have gotten so much more detailed than they used to be. And it just, I think is really good practice. And Ashley, you're doing a great job including information on the agendas on what people are voting on. And I think it's really helpful. The more information, the better as far as the agendas go. More best practices for board members. So make sure you understand the work of the department staffing your board. For example, meet the leadership, ask for a tour if necessary, review key organizational documents and contracts, and understand the board's legal role and some history of past decisions. Before each meeting, review the agenda and copies of the relevant documents or contracts that you will need to make an informed decision. Ask questions about anything you don't understand and note any conflicts that should be disclosed or warrant a recusal. And then the last one is something that I think that you all are sort of consistently and constantly working on, and that's considering adopting metrics for your board to measure whether you are acting timely or in accordance with your board duties. I know that this is something that you all are sort of, I feel like, constantly thinking about when we're talking about audits or our strategic planning sessions. I think you all do a really good job at the metrics part. That's it. That was easy. Does anyone have any questions? No.
I don't think anybody has any questions, Macy. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah. And I can send this to you if you want to send it to the people that weren't present. I think it is required that they at least see it.
Okay, I will send it to them. All right. Well, I will conclude this meeting.
All right.
Thank you
We'll see you
all.
all in person next month. So,
Yes. All right. See you in person.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Kevin, the host, I have a question before I jump off of here.
Absolutely. Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. Where do the videos get posted once they're recorded, and what is the timeline on that?
So it takes about a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours before it get synced to WebEx in the cloud. So then we send the file to MNN, and then they post it to YouTube. And
Oh,
I
okay.
think they're supposed to send you a link to the YouTube site where it'll be posted.
Okay, so it'll be on YouTube probably at least by tomorrow.
Yes, correct. I'm
Okay.
gonna have the link to them today, and
Okay.
then they should have it by tomorrow. And they should I'll make sure when I let them know it's posted, I'll copy you on that email, and then hopefully they'll just let you know, hey, it's been posted, and they'll give you the link.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, because I wanna email it out to some folks since I got the link wrong in the agenda originally.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.